Hey crime nerds! Today we will be discussing someone who grew tired of the seemingly good life he had, so he made the twisted choice to become a family annihilator instead. On the docket today is Mr. John Emil List. John List was born September 17, 1925, in Bay City, Michigan. He was the only child of German-American parents. Like his father, John was a devout Lutheran and a Sunday school teacher. In 1943, John enlisted in the U.S. Army and served in the infantry as a laboratory technician during World War II. After his discharge from the military in 1946, John enrolled at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. He went on to earn a bachelor's degree in business administration, as well as a master's degree in accounting. He was also commissioned as a second lieutenant in the ROTC. In November of 1950, as the Korean War was heating up, John was called to active duty and sent to Fort Eustis, Virginia. It was here that he met his future wife. She was the widow of an infantry officer who was killed in action in Korea. Her name was Helen Morris Taylor, and she lived nearby with her daughter Brenda. John and Helen were married on December 1st, 1951. They were married in Baltimore, Maryland, and the family quickly moved to Northern California. John was moved to the Finance Corps of the Army once they became aware of his accounting skills. After his second tour of duty ended in 1952, John took a job at an accounting firm in Detroit, and then he took a job as an audit supervisor at a paper company in Kalamazoo. This is where his 3 children were born. By 1959, John had risen to general supervisor of the company's accounting department. Helen, his wife, had become an alcoholic, and she had become increasingly unstable. In 1960, Helen's oldest daughter from her first marriage got married and left the family home. John moved the remaining members of the family to Rochester, New York, where he had taken a job with Xerox. While there, he eventually climbed the ladder and managed to get to the position of Director of Accounting Services. In 1965, John accepted a position as Vice President and Comptroller at a bank in Jersey City, New Jersey. This is where he moved his family into Breeze Knoll, a 19-room Victorian mansion at 431 Hillside Avenue in Westfield, New Jersey. This mansion included a ballroom, marble fireplaces, and even a Tiffany skylight. This sounds like a beautiful life full of success, but then 1971 happened, and John lost his job at the bank. He was 46 years old, and even though he had gotten other jobs, they hadn't worked out. He couldn't bear to tell his family about this loss of income. John spent his day at the train station reading the newspaper and skimming money from his mother's bank accounts to pay the mortgage. John refused to ask for help or go on welfare. It would cause great embarrassment and violate the principles of self-sufficiency that his father had taught him. On November 9, 1971, John took action and murdered his family. He methodically shot them one by one. He shot Helen as she sat having her morning coffee after the kids went to school. Then he went upstairs and shot his mother in her bed. He then killed Patricia when she came home from school. Then he killed his youngest son, Frederick, when he arrived home from school. John made himself a sandwich, closed out his bank accounts, and went to cheer on his son John at his high school soccer game. After the game, he drove his son home and shot him in the chest. John arranged the bodies of his family on sleeping bags in the ballroom. He wrote a note to his pastor, who he felt would understand what he had done. You see, John claimed he feared his family, confronted with a world full of evil and poverty, would turn away from God. So this was the only way he could protect them and ensure they made it into heaven. John was not about to have to deal with the worldly consequences of his murderous actions. In an effort to baffle the police and cover his own ass, he meticulously cleaned the crime scene and used scissors to remove himself from all photos in the home. He canceled all deliveries to the home and called the kids' schools to inform them that they would be on vacation for a few weeks. He also turned all the lights on and had religious hymns playing over the intercom, which echoed through the empty rooms of the grand home. He slept in the mansion where his family lay dead. Early the next morning, he walked out the door and wasn't seen again for 18 years. Nearly a month passed before the neighbors noticed the lights were always on and that they hadn't seen any members of the List family, so they contacted the authorities to do a welfare check. When the authorities entered the mansion on December 7, 1971, they were met with organ music playing through the intercom system and a 5-page letter penned by John List, explaining that the bodies in the ballroom were his family, and that he had performed a mercy killing to save the souls of the people he loved the most. The FBI located his car at Kennedy International Airport in New York City, but he was not found and the trail went ice cold. Moving ahead 18 years later to 1989, New Jersey prosecutors came up with a brilliant idea. They hired expert forensic artist Frank Bender to create a bust of John List. Frank Bender imagined how List must have aged, so he gave the bust of John List a hawk nose, grizzled eyebrows, and horn-rimmed eyeglasses. Psychologists determined that List would likely wear the same style glasses he wore as a younger man to remind himself of a more successful time in his life. It was a spot-on depiction of John List. The bust was featured on an episode of America's Most Wanted after they told the story of how he murdered his family and vanished. This episode aired on May 21st, 1989, and an audience of 22 million people saw the bust and tips came pouring in. One such tip came in from a woman in Richmond, Virginia. She believed that her next-door neighbor, Robert Clark, looked remarkably similar to the age-progressed bust of John List. The tipster also shared that her neighbor was working as an accountant and attended church regularly. Authorities made their way to the home of Robert Clark. They spoke with his wife, who he had met at a church social gathering. Her story would unravel an 18-year-long mystery. It turns out List had changed his identity and moved to Colorado under the assumed name Robert Clark. This alias worked, so he kept it up when he relocated to Richmond, Virginia. Police in Virginia took John List into custody in June of 1989, only 9 days after America's Most Wanted had featured his story. At his trial in 1990, defense lawyers argued that List was suffering from PTSD from his military service in World War II and the Korean War. Expert psychologists, however, believed that he was going through a midlife crisis, not PTSD, which the prosecution pointed out was no excuse to take the lives of 5 of your own family members. List was of course found guilty and was sentenced to 5 life terms in a New Jersey prison. In an interview with acclaimed reporter Connie Chung in 2002, John List stated that he didn't end his own life after taking out his entire family because he felt it would prevent him from getting into heaven. All he wanted was to be reunited with his mother, wife, and children in the afterlife, where he believed there would be no pain or suffering. I tend to think this has more to do with the fact that he was too much of a coward and a narcissist, and a little bit of a religious zealot. List's own life came to an end in prison in 2008 when he was 82 years old, where he died alone, as he should have.